Welcome to Season 1, Episode 7 of Life Beyond Loss, the podcast. This is a guest show where we share the most amazing and inspirational stories of navigating grief and loss through to healing and transformation. I'm your host, Louise Kresick, grief and loss coach, and today this show is a real treat. I think this is my first guest from across the pond. I'm talking to public speaker and coach Jessie Brisendine about grief mindset and ways in which we can reframe our grief. Jessie shares his own personal experience of losing both his dad and his best friend within weeks of each other, and how this led to his mission and more recently his TED Talk on why grief is not a life sentence. Stacks of value in this one, so stay tuned. Well, I am joined on today's show by Jessie Brisendine. I hope I said that correctly and didn't butcher
You nailed
that,
it.
Jessie.
You nailed it.
Yay! Jessie is a public speaker. He's a coach. We're going to learn a little bit more about that in a minute. And you know what also? He's an early bird. He's an early bird. What time is it where you are, Jessie?
It's a little after 7 a.m.
Do you know what? I don't think I see 7 a.m. that often. So for me, that's early.
You know what, Louise? I've been up for 4 hours.
That's brilliant. So, Jessie, you know what? On that note, I normally start by asking people, you know, who you are and what you do. But actually, I want to get straight into something because I've got a bit of a burning question here.
Mm-hmm.
So you always sign off your social media posts with Carpe Diem, seize the day.
Yep.
And this is really relevant that you just said you've been up for 4 hours. I want to know, what is it about seize the day then that kind of speaks to you? Why you use that?
Yeah, it's funny. I nobody's ever asked me that, I think, and it's something that ever since I was a little kid, there was just something about the phrase of it, the way it sounded. It stuck with me. It was even like it stuck with me. It was almost as if it was a part of me. And I even signed up to take a Latin class in college because I loved Carpe Diem so much that I thought, oh, I'll learn Latin. And then I took 2 days of it and realized how hard it was and said, nope, I don't want to learn Latin. I'll just stick with Carpe Diem. But I think it's something to be said is that each day is we don't approach it like this. We don't approach our days necessarily with the conscious awareness that, what we have right now is the only thing that's guaranteed to us, and that if we're lucky enough to get the next minute, we're certainly not in any way guaranteed the moment after that, or the moment after that, or the moment after that. And when we go to sleep at night, we assume that we'll be here tomorrow, but there's no guarantee with that. And so I think really seize the day is about, just making an effort to make a most of it. And sometimes people will take that into being like, oh, it's this rah-rah, and you got to go out there and charge and do all the crazy stuff you want to do. You go skydiving, you all those types of things. And I wouldn't even say that. It's about finding a place where you can be present, finding a place where you can be blissfully content in certain moments. I had a very kind of lazy down day on Sunday where I barely even left the house, and it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful, and I didn't really at the moment think of any other way I wanted to spend the day. And so seizing the day is really, for me, it's making the most of each day for whatever you need each day to be and mean to you.
That's lovely. I love that. And like, yeah, I just feel like I had a burning question there, so I had to get straight into that one. But
That was a good one to start with.
wow, yeah. And like, so let's tell people then, in relation to your perspective on that, on Seize the Day, you know, how does that fit in with, you know, what you do? And let's tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So I operate from this basic core belief that the two greatest powers that all human beings have are the thoughts we think and the feelings we feel. And that the two greatest adversaries to achieving anything and everything we want in life are the thoughts we think and the feelings we feel. And the nature of my work with individuals and organizations is helping them get those two awesome forces working together instead of working in opposition with each other to, break through limiting beliefs and really just create epicness, greatness, amazingness, whatever adjective we want to use for the day. And what's really important about that is epicness, amazingness it's unique. It's an individual or an organizational basis. So for some that might be, they want to be a A-list movie star. For others that might be, they want to be the world's greatest husband, the most amazing mother ever. For some it might be just to have a thriving small business. For others it might be to figure out a way to travel the world and take a ton of photos. And for some it might be just to be a really strong social contributor in their local community. And I think that's a really important distinction, because we live in this world now where we get to see these curated versions of people's lives. And after a little Photoshop and a little green screening, all of us can look like we're just doing these crazy cool things every day. And so then the perception can be from the outside looking in that, a life of meaning, a life of significance is a life that you're going out there and doing all these crazy cool things, and that you'll finally be happy when you achieve that. There was a lady on one of my lives recently, and she had made a comment that she didn't know she didn't know if she even knew what happiness was. And quite fortuitously, shortly after she made that comment, I had a banner that was on the wall mounted behind me. And this was a recent addition to my wall, and I had made a big point of pointing it out and all these types of things in the live. And shortly after she said that, the banner fell down right as the live stream was going. And I kind of stopped, looked at it, made a joke. A couple people typed in jokes. I made more jokes. Everybody was laughing. And then I saw her type in, ha, 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 that was really funny. And I said to her, congratulations, you now know what a moment of happiness is. And that recognized that happiness didn't have to come from, getting the dream car, owning the big house, or any of those types of things. Happiness just came from some silly, real human experience of a banner falling down in the middle of it. And then all these people who were from all sorts of different backgrounds around the world, everybody laughing together. And so I think that's a really important distinction to make, is that what this really is about for all of us is it's figuring out what is our happy, what is fulfillment for us, what is a meaningful day for us, and then putting our intention on seizing that and maximizing it to the best of our ability.
And how does that kind of show up in, the work that you do?
Yeah, it makes it very clear, because I think the end game for all of us is fulfillment. I think that everything that we're after in life we're always after the emotional payoff of it. So if your example is, we were just talking off of the recording about you going on this really cool holiday coming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, there's a lot of emotional language that you were using to describe it, right? How fun it's going to be, how it's silliness, how it's going to be this exciting time, right? And you could even hear that exuberance in your voice. So part of the excitement, the anticipation for you is not just the physical experience of going to and having this experience with your friends, but it's the emotional payoff that you're perceiving that you're going to get from having that experience with the people, right? So it's always emotion that we're after. We're always after the emotion. And so my belief is this, is that if we know that everything that we do, we always want the emotional payoff on it, why not just learn how to get the emotional payoff now and how to experience it every day and often? And that way, what we can do is then we can really channel in our energy in what we produce or how we interact or we show up in the world towards what I think our greater purpose would be. And we're not so preoccupied chasing things. It doesn't mean that if you want these things not to go for them, by all means. I think there's some really cool stuff out there and we should go for it. But you're not having to rely on the stuff to bring the emotion. You already have the emotion. And when we have that emotional base, what I find with people is it finds them centering more into purpose and honoring and fulfilling a purpose life. And then life becomes purpose driven as opposed to possession driven.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. This makes my heart sing.
Oh, yay!
Yay! Because I just think that I come from a very similar belief, I think. And, you know, people often sort of find that approach to loss and grief quite I guess maybe it's still a bit alien to some people to kind of shift the perspective kind of away from, you know, what we've lost. And I appreciate that, you know, it's important for everybody to go through that grief journey in their own way and in their own time. But actually to shift, for me, it is really about kind of shifting the perspective in, you know, life beyond loss. And it's really interesting to me because quite often people struggle with pain, you know, long after the grief's actually gone.
Yes.
And they're still sort of, you know, stuck in that place. So how does that kind of, you know, how does this translate for you? Because I know that you do work, you know, with people who have experienced loss, and this is a theme of, you know, your work. How does it translate for you in terms of grief and loss?
Yeah, I have actually a really cool, very recent story that I think would be a great share for this, and I'll get to that in a second. Pain is often a placeholder for purpose after loss. And what I mean by that is that there is a purpose that can evolve from loss. So when we lose someone, we mourn the physical loss, but what we also mourn is we mourn the perceived loss of connection with that person that we had, right? And we also have this fear that surges, the fear of what if all that we experienced with them wasn't real? What if we never feel something like that again? What if they're forgotten? What if we forget them? And what we start to use is we start to use pain as a way to keep them alive. We start to use pain as a way to quantify our love. We start to use pain as a way to keep it real, because as long as if I pinch myself and I pinch myself really hard, while I may not like the pain, I have an awareness, right? And that awareness is say I'm pinching my hand in this case would be my loved one that I lost. So now I start to form this association that whenever I have to think of them, I feel pain, because as long as I feel pain, it justifies how much I love, justifies the hurt, and it also becomes this placeholder for purpose. Where much of my work is doing with people with grief and loss and healing from loss is really helping them transcend that painful place and get to a purposeful place. Because what we all want after loss is we want that connection. And the connection is still available, and this is going to get to my really cool story in a second. The connection is still available to us. These people that we've lost, they can be a part of our joy in life, just as they are just a part of our joy in death, just as they are part of our joy in life, if we allow them to. If we allow them to be a presence, if we allow them to be a connection, if we allow ourselves to really have an honest conversation with them, not go external to the well-intentioned advice of everyone, but really honest conversation with them is, what would they want for us? How would they want us to live our lives? And commit ourselves to living our lives in a way that honors them, commit ourselves to living our lives in a way that they would want for us. And what ends up happening with this is it opens us up to forming these new connections with our loved ones. And they're connections that death can't sever, because as we start to create these positive experiences in our life moving forward, all those foundational pieces that we form are because of the loved ones. So everything we do, I'm sitting here talking to you just as you're sitting here talking to me, because we've lost someone, and in in many similar ways, you and I are doing what we're doing because we're honoring those that we've lost. And so how we show up today, we're doing it not just because we wanted to be here, but we're doing it because we're intentionally honoring the people that we've lost. So in some way, those who you've lost, those who I've lost, they're a part of us. It's like they're this little bird sitting on our shoulders, right? A presence that, if we stop and really think about it and acknowledge it, there's an awareness that there's a presence of them there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So really cool story, if you don't mind, I think would be really.
Yeah.
And this just happened this weekend. My best friend was killed in a car crash several years ago. And I still will talk out loud to him at random at different times. And it's not just, I say at random, it's more of when I'm aware of his presence, I'll just say his name out loud or say something out loud to him. And his girlfriend had really been struggling for quite some time with this. And we had this really neat conversation recently where she had felt that he had connected with her. And so she goes, and I had been thinking about her. She'd been on my mind. I was thinking, gosh, I need to reach out, just check in, say hello. I go to open my phone to write her. And right as I go to open my phone, I see a text message from her pop up, talking to me about feeling connected to him. And I was opening my phone to check on her, to tell her that I had just felt really connected to him. Those connections open up when we allow ourselves to move past pain and really connect to love. See, we can use pain as a way to quantify love, but we really can't feel love to the same degree that we were feeling love when they were physically present. Because if we have pain there, it's kind of like you have a glass of water, you have a glass, it's empty, and you could fill it up with water, you could fill it up with pain, you could fill it up with love. But many of us, what we'll do is we'll fill it up with two parts, one part pain, one part love. So is it 50% love? Yeah, but it's also 50% pain. And in that, they get intermixed, and so the perception gets cloudy. The surest way to get what we want is to allow ourselves to empty out some of that pain and really fill it more with love.
And I love that you say to allow ourselves to do that, because I think there's definitely something in giving yourself permission to do that, and to just have to kind of be with that grief, and just to have that grief as a sort of, it's not like the end thing, it's not the destination, it's just the path to sort of go along really until we get to a better place. And I think quite often people struggle with, clients come to me, how do I get rid of this grief? Mm-hmm. How do I push this away? How do I not have this grief anymore? I don't want this anymore. And so I just love what you said there about allowing ourselves to empty that out and to just go on that journey.
It's so important. It's absolutely crucial.
But yeah, so let's also talk about your TED Talk. We have to talk about this TED Talk.
Yeah,
amazing. Cool. It's had like well over 2,000 views so far on YouTube, which is so impressive, Jessie. But this idea that grief is not a life sentence, I absolutely love, and again, especially resonates with me when I talk about life beyond loss. So go on, tell us a little bit about what this whole idea that grief is not a life sentence.
Yeah, this has been, it's funny, Louise, like, how you can carry on and you're just going and you're doing what you think you're supposed to do, and then there's this stuff that that you're meant to do, but you don't quite see it even though it's staring you in the face all along.
Yeah.
And I have, for the last 10, 12 years of my life, in some way, shape, or form, been dabbling in helping people heal from loss. And it started out originally with relationships. When I went through my first broken heart, I was struggling to find any sort of real resources for guys out there. And because I was a mess, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, was crying uncontrollably, all these types of things. And, everything for men out there was, get out there and jump into bed with someone else, or, whatever, those kinds of stiff upper lip, get over it, toughen up.
Oh, that's so British.
Right? Well, it's very American too. It's like the cowboy and the British get together, and this is the best advice they come up with, right?
Keep calm and carry on, darling.
Yeah, right. Get on with it. Get over it. I'm like, gosh. And I didn't feel that way. And in fact, like even in entertaining those kinds of ideas, it didn't sit well with me. And so I couldn't find anything. And I made this website to share stories and it started off for men, but what ended up happening is I had people from all over the world were writing in, and I had an alias in it. So it was kind of like those Dear Abby columns, but it was more of a Dear John type thing. And I'd have people writing in talking about the relationships, and I would just start talking to them about it. And then that kind of evolved into when I first had my first real experience with death. And the first one was, is one of those ones that was like often described as like a loss of innocence. It was violent. It rocked so many facets of my life to the core. It shook things up in ways I never anticipated. And then when I finally started to bounce back from that one, my dad died unexpectedly. And so there was this other one where all of a sudden now that one was more of like having to acknowledge my own mortality, because even though I was aware of death and I thought it was something that everybody else did, I definitely didn't think it would apply to my parents, that they'd be around forever. And when my best friend was killed a couple of years after that, I found myself in this really interesting place where my friend had described it this way, which it's a strange thing to say, but she said she looked at me and would say I was a more mature griever, in the sense of I'd gone through enough loss at that point where I was aware of my own emotions, but I was also able to step outside of myself and ask myself, what's going on here? What do I need? Is there a better way to go through this process? And what I started asking myself, there's this expression, the quality of our lives is determined often by the quality of questions we ask. And I started asking some really quality questions during that time. I was asking myself, what is it? What are the keys? Like, what is it that allows someone to heal after a loss and others not to? I couldn't accept that when I was going through it, and I'd ask people, how long does this take? How long do I feel this way? And well-intentioned people would tell me that it just takes time. Grief has no timeline. And then the big one is you may grieve the rest of your life. And I'm thinking, God, I can barely breathe. I can barely sleep. And you're telling me I might feel this way for the rest of my life? Mm. Boy, that just really inspires me to want to get out of bed in the morning and, carpe diem, right? Mm. And again, these were well-intentioned people, but they were going off of what they had been taught. And I started thinking, gosh, we're really never taught anything around this. There's nothing, so what we're left with just these raw, vulnerable experiences. And then we go and we start to try to figure it out. And we start to maybe Google some stuff, and then we start to see, we start to match up what we're physically feeling. And we say, oh my gosh, maybe I have anxiety, I have depression, I have all these types of things, and maybe we'll get medicated for it, whatever that course might be. And really what we are is we're human beings just having these really radically intense emotional experiences, and we're vulnerable, we're hurt, we're in pain. And so the nature of the TED Talk is I wanted to provide people with a, for lack of a better term, some sort of blueprint, a kind of roadmap to how you could heal from loss, and in a way that was empowering, that it was really focused on love and honoring those they've lost, that it gave them a platform to ask themselves some really high quality questions. I think that there's this, people can fall into that dangerous trap of despair where you almost get you can almost become grief groupies, and you start to form these connections and bonds with other people over your pain, right? So it becomes this emotional contest of whose pain is more significant. When I first got into this work, I remember, my gosh, I got some of the meanest messages I've ever had from people. How can you say this? You don't know what it's like. You're too young to be talking about this, blah, 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 and all these types of things. And they wanted to just compare their losses because I was suggesting to them that we didn't have to be sad and depressed all the time. That we could be happy, that it was possible to live a fulfilling life after loss. And there's some people that didn't want that. They really didn't want to hear that. And it's not because they were just so enthralled or enraptured in their pain, they wanted to keep it around. It's just that they hadn't learned any differently. And what they had learned is they had learned that by associating to their pain, it meant it was able to meet their basic needs at a high level because they hadn't learned any other alternative at the time. So the nature of the TED Talk is really about giving people a light in the dark and helping them illuminate a path that can lead them out of the dark into a place of just where really life can be great beyond loss, but not only can it be great for you, it can be great in a way that honors the persons or the people that you've lost.
Wow. I mean, I totally recommend everybody sort of have a watch of this TED Talk because it's just fantastic, and we'll put up the link there as well for people.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
I think that one of the things that struck me when I listened to the initial part of your talk, where you talked about your own kind of personal story, didn't you, or some of your story around loss, and there was a bit of a dichotomy there, wasn't there, between, you know, the losing your father and then how you kind of lost your friend. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that with people? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first I had a grandmother who I wasn't particularly close to die when I was a teenager. But aside from that, my first real experience from loss was one of my closest friends took his own life. And it was in a very violent way. I found him when he was still alive, and it was you know, those war scenes or those scenes that you see in movies can never really fully capture the gore, the emotion, all those types of things that come with these. And he was going through a tough time, and he didn't think that there was a way out. And so for him, the way out became taking his own life. That seemed like the only way he was going to be away from his pain. And he felt like time and staying around feeling as he was feeling was the ultimate enemy. Now, the other side of that was my father, and my father had been through a 2-year-plus battle with colon cancer. He had surgery, he had chemo, the whole thing. And my dad died about 6.5 months after my friend did. And my dad had called me up on my birthday to tell me, he said, "Jess, I have some really great news." And I said, "What's that, Dad?" And he said, "Well, I went in for the checkup with my doctor today." He said that he looked me in the eye, shook my hand, and said, "Congratulations, Mike, you're cancer-free. You've earned more time." So my dad had fought to have more time to do the things that he wanted to do. You know, my dad was a classic example of putting things off until later. You know, take that cool vacation with the friends later. You know, go and see those historic landmarks later. Do the things that he'd always talked about wanting to do later. And so he finally earned and had this promise dangled in front of him of more time, and 2 weeks after that, he dropped dead. And I found myself really looking at this saying, okay, so on one hand, I have somebody who looks at time as the enemy. On the other hand, I have someone desperately fighting for more time. And what a cruel almost irony of it that both people, their focus is the same thing, time, but for one of them, they're looking at it as an enemy. The other one's looking at it as an asset. And the one who feels like they don't want it, they have it, but they take it away. And the one who does want it, it gets taken away from them.
Just gives me like goosebumps listening to that. It's just, wow, I don't know. It's just, it just really impacts me, I think. And I'm really curious as well to know that So you've got all this amazing kind of perspective as well, and you're kind of coaching people and putting this stuff out there. And then so when this happens, when you experience loss like that on a kind of a personal level,
mm-hmm.
How good are you at kind of taking your own kind of perspective then, and like sort of working with that? How did you kind of approach that? How did you deal with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's another one nobody ever asks. I think people are sometimes scared to ask that question.
Well, I'm coming at it from a coach. I'm a coach, but actually, am I always that great at taking? I don't know. Yeah. It's definitely a challenge.
I so appreciate the question, because I think it's such a real and important question to ask. And so, what I do, Louise, is I put on the first few days to the first week at minimum, I put on my human hat, and I allow myself to feel everything. I lost so in this last year and a half, 2017, from May of 2017 until April of 2018, I lost 8 people who I was extremely close to, close friends and family members. And for a bit of time there, it was literally one person a month. And of those, there was only one of them, or I guess actually there was a couple of them who were older and you were kind of expecting. There was the rest of them, though, were all unexpected, out of nowhere. A couple were completely shocking. One was this lady who is kind of like my Santa Barbara, where I live in Southern California, my Santa Barbara mom. I've known her for most of my life here. I'm extremely close with her whole family. I just had dinner with her husband last night, who's kind of like a Santa Barbara dad figure. And she was just the most full of life human being ever. And they were getting ready to go out to dinner one night, and she just said she had a headache. He went to get her some ice. He was hurt her fall, saw her. She dropped on the floor. He calls 911, and they get her to the hospital, and she had some sort of massive, I think, like aneurysm or something, and it ended up taking off her life support for 24 hours later. And when that happened, I was in the hospital with the family when they were making those decisions and stuff, and she was very clear with everyone, and everybody who knew her knew that she was what her wishes were in terms of being hooked up to machines and all those types of things. And I took, the next week after that, I just felt. I barely left my house. I cried like crazy. I often will isolate myself that first week just so I can be really vulnerable with my feelings. And I went to, for example, I went to a different gym than I'd normally go to, because I the people at the gym who I would normally go to, they all love and care, but I just didn't have it in me to be able to be there, to be receptive to their loving and caring at that time. I just needed to really be inward. Mm-hmm. So I allow myself to feel all the horrible, nasty stuff that we don't necessarily want to feel, the uncontrollable, convulsing crying, where there's just literally snot coming out of your eyes because you have so much of it coming up. I allow myself to get angry. I have those horrible, conversations that we may not want to admit sometimes, maybe with God, about just, how could you do this? Being pissed off at whoever and whatever, all those types of things. Because I really believe that if what we don't express, we depress. And it is imperative for us that if we ever want to fully heal from a loss, or even begin to heal, we have to express it. We can't depress this stuff down, because it's kind of like our rubbish bins, right? We can push it down to a point, and we all like to go by and maybe shove it, give it a couple extra shoves. But at some point it starts to overflow. And not only that, but everything that's shoved at the bottom, it's rotting. And it starts to rot everything else in there. And our emotions are much like that. Mm-hmm. And then once I start to have what I call in-between moments, and those are the moments that you start to come up for air. They might be the moments that you just get done with a really strong cry and you breathe, or you have one of those random moments of laughter where you find yourself just laughing uncontrollably at something that happened in the past and you just don't know why, because you're in this weird dichotomy of you just got done crying, maybe you're even still crying, but you're kind of laughing, but you can't stop, and then you get upset at yourself for laughing because it seems inappropriate because you're so sad. Those kinds of in-between moments. And in those in-between moments, that's where I start to ask myself some questions. And those questions always come to, how would they want me to live? What would they want me to do in this moment? How would they want me to experience this moment right now? And I allow them to be my guide with it. I allow them to be my guide. And so if it's something just as simple as, they would want me to smile, I will sit there and smile. I will allow myself to smile at a positive memory. It doesn't mean that the painful part of it is gone by any means. Not at all. There's going to still be many times where there's going to be lots of tears and whatnot. But what is really important for me, and something I advise everyone to do, if you're listening to this and you've just recently lost someone, or if you've lost someone, it's been years now, no matter what stage you are, is to recognize that you have a very important opportunity in front of you right now. And that's either to allow the loss to define you, or you make the choice of how you're going to define it. If the loss starts to define you, which is what many of us will unconsciously do, right? That's where we start to fall into these kind of dangerous traps of despair, where everything starts to become this line of life before loss and life after. Before loss, it was happy, it was this, it was that, and now it's sad, and we have this dark cloud of grief around us all the time. But defining the loss is really, again, it's those moments of acknowledging what your loved ones want, and acknowledging what you know in your heart they would want for you, which is not to spend your life sad and suffering, consumed by grief and guilt, but whether it be really to heal, to be happy, to love, to pursue your dreams, because ultimately that's what bonded you in life, and it's also what can still bond you in this evolution of life, and the evolution of your life, and wherever they are now. And so then taking those little steps, as tender as they may be, whether that's just a smile in the moment because that's what they'd want for you, or maybe it's finally reaching out to someone. It's me finally allowing those people who are standing by, waiting to give me a hug, waiting to, talk, waiting to listen, giving them space to finally be able to do that. It's those little tender steps. So always allow yourself to feel first. I think that sometimes people will get in these habits of just busying themselves, being super busy, or they try to distract themselves because they don't want to feel it. But if you don't express that, you're just depressing it. And there's no mistake that the depressing it, where we have a very common used term in our culture now with depression and how it comes from, and we wonder where it comes from. We start to depress emotions over and over, and we're not expressing them. It just goes toxic in our system. So I appreciate that question. It's an important one. And I think that sometimes people will look at folks like myself and you, Louise, and we're helping people on this side of it now, and think, okay, well, you got all these tools and everything. What's it like? Underneath these people who are here to help you, we're still human beings. Mm-hmm. And I will be the first to say that when you lose someone you love, and when no matter how many people I've lost, it friggin' hurts. It hurts like nothing else. And there are people in my life who I love so dearly, and I don't even ever want to imagine having to lose them, because I know how deeply painful that will be. Mm-hmm. And it kind of goes full circle back to your first question about carpe diem. Perhaps that can be in the moment. It's just about loving those people who are present in your life, loving them while you have the opportunity, love them as fully as you possibly can. Let them know how much they mean to you. When you hug them, hold them an extra second longer. Pay them a compliment, send them the random text message. Just dial them up for whatever. Go and rock out to 90s music when the opportunity's there, because we just don't know when it's not going to be. And I think that's really, in some ways, the ultimate carpe diem, because it's recognizing that there are people in our lives who are extremely precious.
Yeah. I think my biggest takeaway from what you everything you just said about dealing with that as well is that question, that really powerful question about what would my loved one want for me.
Yeah.
I just think that carries so much power, and it's just so, yeah, that's all I can say. I think it's a powerful question, and I love that you said that. And I was going to ask you if you had any kind of words of wisdom, words of encouragement for people, but I think you've also kind of covered that about, you know, just kind of taking that time as the one thing, but then like deciding, you know, being, I think the perspective about, you know, what happens next, and that we can define what happens next, like you say, rather than having the loss sort of define us. I think that is a brilliant way to look at it. So I just want to say thank you, Jessie, because I mean, I could listen to you all day. We could talk. I know we could talk about all this. And I just want to point out to the listeners as well that your 90s rock music reference wasn't completely random. Because I was just talking to Jessie before we came on live that I am going to a 90s music festival next week. So it wasn't completely random. Oh gosh, also, I could just hear people thinking, why 90s?
Yeah, where does 90s fit in with loss?
But I thank you so much for coming on the show, and I think it'd be great to have you, you know, back on again at some point in the future, because I think we could definitely talk more about this.
Yeah, I would absolutely love that, Louise. Thank you so much for having me on and giving me the time to share, and thank you for what you're doing and how you're showing up in the world and helping others, and rock out to that 90s music.
Yay! Before we go, can you just tell people as well where they can get hold of you, how they can get hold of you?
Yeah, I'm all over the internet. So Jesse Brisendine, if you look for me on Facebook, Instagram are the main ones I'm on. I have Twitter, but I haven't been on Twitter. I'm on Twitter every day, but just I engage, interact a lot more on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. There's probably thousands of videos I have on YouTube. So if you really want to, you want to have a binge watching party, you can stay there and you'll never get through them all. And then my website's just my name.
So get your popcorn and get on YouTube and search for Jessie and boo to Twitter, because no one does Twitter anymore.
You know, it's hard. I love the idea, but it's too much. Like every time I go on there, I feel like everything is just political. Oh God, this is the last thing I want to look at right now.
Thank you so much, Jessie. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Louise. Take care.